Queen Elizabeth is revealing secrets about the day she was crowned nearly 65 years ago. The Queen was interviewed for a documentary that will air on the Smithsonian Channel this Sunday.
Queen Elizabeth II spent a lifetime mastering the art of silence, offering only carefully measured words and an impenetrable expression to the public. Yet, on a few rare occasions, the mask slipped, just for a second. In those fleeting moments, her true feelings surfaced, silently but unmistakably. For years, what she really said remained a mystery. Until now, a top lip reader has finally decoded her unspoken words at weddings, funerals, and tense family gatherings. What was once hidden behind palace walls is now out in the open, and it's absolutely shocking. The Queen's most unfiltered moments. Queen Elizabeth II built her reign on poise, duty, and restraint. But behind the carefully measured smiles and diplomatic phrases, there were rare moments, unscripted flashes of temper and frustration, that slipped through the cracks of royal protocol. These were instances so unexpected, they were nearly forgotten over time. But they reveal more about the woman behind the crown than any official portrait ever could. One of the most famous incidents unfolded in 2007 during a high-profile photo session with acclaimed American photographer Annie Lieovitz. The Queen had arrived dressed in her ceremonial garderobes, complete with the heavy state crown. When Lieovitz suggested she remove the crown for a more relaxed look, the Queen, visibly irritated, shot back, "Less dressy? What do you think this is?" Then turning away, she was overheard snapping, "I'm not changing anything. I've had enough dressing like this. Thank you very much." Although the BBC later admitted to editing the footage in a misleading way and issued an apology, the moment had already offered the public a rare glimpse of the monarch's human side. Assertive, sharp, and unwilling to compromise her dignity. Years earlier, in 2002, during a quieter moment at the Windsor Horse Show, the Queen's temper flared again. She was watching Prince Philip compete in a carriage driving event when a group of photographers crept too close for her liking. Without hesitation, she waved them away and shouted, "Do you mind?" Her voice was unmistakably firm. It was a fleeting outburst, but one that showed how fiercely protective she could be of both her personal space and her husband's moment. Perhaps most surprising was an incident during her 1954 tour of Australia. While staying in a remote chalet, a film crew stationed nearby unexpectedly captured an argument between the Queen and Prince Philip. He stormed out, only for a tennis racket to fly after him, followed by the Queen's raised voice calling him back. The footage was never released publicly at the time, but decades later, royal biographer Ingrid Seward recounted it in Prince Philip Revealed, describing the clash as both shocking and intimate. Even in later years, her authority remained intact. During the Queen's 90th birthday celebrations in 2016, while standing on the Buckingham Palace balcony, Prince William knelt to speak to young Prince George. The Queen, without missing a beat, turned and firmly told him, "Stand up, William." It wasn't harsh, it was commanding. A subtle reminder that no matter how modern the monarchy seemed to be becoming, tradition still reigned when she was present. If you thought a photo shoot gone wrong was unexpected, the Queen's reaction to a surprise dish will leave you speechless. The Queen's fury in the kitchen. Even away from the flashing cameras and balcony appearances, the Queen's high standards remained untouched, especially in her own kitchen. One man who understood this better than most was Darren McGrady, the royal chef who served her for over a decade. Every morning, without fail, the Queen expected a printed menu listing the day's offerings: breakfast, lunch, afternoon tea, and dinner. Each dish had to be approved in advance, and if the kitchen staff dared to suggest something new, they were required to submit the complete recipe for her review. Surprises weren't part of the royal palate. Everything had to be precise, measured, and, above all, proper. But during one summer stay at Balmoral Castle, McGrady made what seemed like a small mistake. Wanting to offer something different, he wrote down a dessert called Veiled Farmer's Daughters, a Scandinavian treat made with layers of spiced crumble, fruit compote, and whipped cream. He forgot, however, to include the full recipe. Within hours, he received a handwritten note directly from the Queen. It read, "What or who are the veiled farmer's daughters?" McGrady later admitted it was one of the few times he'd seen the Queen truly angry. The tone was firm, the message was unmistakable. Rules were rules, even when it came to pudding. He scrambled to provide the recipe, and thankfully, the dish was approved. In fact, once served, it became a summer favorite, but he never again submitted a menu without every detail in place. While her standards could feel unbending, her personal preferences made them easier to understand. For instance, the Queen had a strong dislike for garlic, so strong, in fact, that the ingredient was banned from royal meals. Not a trace of it was allowed on her plate. Even the smallest hint was enough to draw her disapproval. Every chef in the royal household knew better than to risk it. Her favorite dishes leaned toward the delicate and refined. One such favorite was Dover sole, served with spinach and zucchini. Light, simple, and elegant. Prince Philip, on the other hand, had far bolder tastes. He especially enjoyed salmon kalibiak, a rich, savory pie with Slavic origins, layered with pastry, rice, herbs, and fish. His preferences were as hearty and expressive as hers were restrained. What went on in the royal kitchens was rarely seen, but it revealed more about the Queen's character than most people ever knew. When crowns clash with hearts. That same unwavering precision behind the Queen's kitchen doors followed her through the grandeur of royal occasions, like the unforgettable wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer on July 29, 1981. As Diana stepped out of her glass coach outside St. Paul's Cathedral, the world held its breath. She was just 20, cloaked in layers of ivory silk taffeta and framed by a 25-foot-long train. Her expression a mix of wonder and unease. To millions watching from their living rooms, it was the beginning of a real-life fairy tale, an innocent young woman marrying the heir to the British throne. But behind that dazzling image, hidden by the towering columns of the cathedral and the cheers of the crowd, something much more complicated was unfolding. What few saw that day was the quiet exchange between the Queen and Diana as they stood side by side on the Buckingham Palace balcony, smiling and waving as if everything was perfect. For decades, it was assumed they said nothing to each other in that moment. But years later, a professional lip reader revealed the truth. As Diana tried to hide her nerves beneath a practiced smile, the Queen leaned in and softly said, "Look at them. They've been waiting all day just to see you." It was a rare and unexpected gesture of kindness, especially from a monarch known for her formality and reserve. It wasn't just a comment about the crowds. It was a subtle acknowledgement of the enormous weight now resting on Diana's shoulders. Yet even that gentle encouragement couldn't soothe the heartbreak that had already begun to take root. Just the night before the wedding, Diana received a note from Prince Charles. Brief, encouraging, and hopeful. Just look him in the eye and knock him dead. But hours later, the very man she was about to marry shattered that illusion. According to Diana's trusted astrologer, Charles confessed that he didn't truly love her. He said he didn't want to start a marriage built on false hope. For the young bride-to-be, already under the weight of royal expectation, those words were devastating. She later confessed that the fairy tale had begun to unravel before she even reached the altar. Charles's admission was not a careless remark. It was the uncomfortable truth. Because while the world was being told that Diana was his one and only, Charles's heart belonged to someone else, Camilla Parker Bowles. Their complicated relationship had long been a thorn in the side of royal tradition. Camilla was married, then divorced, and for years her presence hovered quietly on the edge of royal life, always just out of frame. Diana knew it. The Queen knew it. Everyone close to the family knew it. Decades later, when Charles and Camilla finally had the chance to marry, the royal household braced for a different kind of ceremony. It was April 2005, and while the couple stood smiling on the steps of the Guild Hall in Windsor, one detail stood out more than any other. The Queen was not there. Many assumed it was a sign of disapproval, that perhaps she still harbored resentment over what had happened with Diana. But the truth had less to do with emotion and everything to do with duty. As the supreme governor of the Church of England, the Queen could not, in good conscience, attend a civil wedding. Since both Charles and Camilla were divorced, they weren't permitted to marry in a traditional church setting. So instead, they opted for a quiet civil ceremony, followed by a religious blessing at St. George's Chapel. The Queen and Prince Philip didn't attend the civil ceremony, but made their presence known where it mattered most, at the chapel and during the reception. Inside Windsor Castle, at the reception hosted by the Queen herself, she offered not just her presence but her blessing in words few expected. In a speech that drew laughter and emotion, she likened their journey to a horse race, one filled with hurdles, pitfalls, and unexpected detours. "They've come through Becker's Brook and the Chair," she said, naming infamous jumps from the Grand National, "and all kinds of terrible obstacles. My son is home and dry with the woman he loves." It was a surprising display of affection, a public acknowledgement that Camilla was no longer just part of Charles's past, but firmly rooted in his future. Her attendance at the blessing, her words at the reception, and her quiet acceptance that day sent a powerful message. While the Queen could not bend the rules of her office, she could open her heart. And though Diana's story had ended in tragedy, Charles's long, turbulent path to happiness finally found solid ground, with Camilla by his side. But as the cameras kept flashing and the royal events unfolded, what happened behind closed doors that shook the royal calm over a mere piece of fiction? Stay tuned. The Crown First aired on Netflix in 2016. Long before The Crown stirred headlines across the world, Queen Elizabeth II had approached the show with curiosity rather than judgment. It was Prince Edward and Sophie, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, who first introduced the series to her, bringing DVDs to Windsor Castle for relaxed weekend viewing. At first, the Queen found it entertaining, an elegant reenactment of history she had lived through. She even smiled at the dramatizations, finding amusement in the actors' performances and how the show tried to capture royal life. Vanessa Kirby, who played Princess Margaret in the early seasons, once recalled hearing from Princess Eugenie that Granny really liked it. But the novelty didn't last. As the series progressed into deeper, darker chapters of the royal family's history, the tone shifted. The stories became less about the institution and more about the personal struggles of its members. With each new season, fiction blurred more boldly into fact. And then came Season 2, Episode 9, the one moment that changed everything for the Queen. The episode focused on a painful decision made decades earlier: where to send young Prince Charles to school. In the show, Charles is depicted as a lonely, tearful boy at Gordonstoun, the austere Scottish boarding school that Prince Philip had also attended as a child. The portrayal showed Charles writing heartbreaking letters home, bullied and miserable, while Philip, played with icy detachment by Matt Smith, responded with brutal indifference, dismissing his son as bloody weak. For millions of viewers, the scene struck an emotional chord, but for Queen Elizabeth, it cut far deeper. According to palace insiders, the Queen was distressed not just by the dramatization of her son's pain, but by the cold, almost unfeeling portrait of Prince Philip. She knew many would see The Crown as history, despite its disclaimers, and the thought that the public might walk away believing Philip had been a heartless father was devastating. Behind closed doors, her frustration was clear. Yes, Charles had struggled at Gordonstoun, and he had spoken about it publicly over the years, but he had also credited the school with shaping his resilience. The Queen had lived through those decisions, had witnessed the concern and care that went into them, and knew Philip to be far from the callous man shown on screen. There were no official statements from Buckingham Palace. The Queen maintained her long-standing rule: never complain, never explain. But those close to her sensed a shift. The admiration she once had for the series quietly evaporated. What began as entertainment had wandered into sacred, private territory, and for a woman who valued duty and discretion above all, that trespass left an invisible scar. The carriage that carried more than just a bride. Still reeling from the emotional tension stirred by the crown, Queen Elizabeth found herself clinging ever tightly to symbols of stability, none more so than the tradition and elegance tied to royal ceremony. That reverence for history was on full display on April 29, 2011, when Prince William married Catherine Middleton in a moment that seemed to breathe new life into a battered monarchy.
Amidst the call for changes in the monarchy,
Years of divorce, scandal, and public disillusionment had dimmed the crown's luster.
Fortunately, my father and I have about the same sort of shaped head. And you can't look down to read the speech, you have to take the speech up.
But Kate, poised, grounded, and unmistakably modern, offered a quiet reassurance that the royal family could still capture the public's imagination. The Queen saw it instantly. She had welcomed Kate with open arms, sensing not just her grandson's happiness, but the symbolic renewal her presence represented. This wasn't simply a wedding. It was a carefully choreographed promise that the future could still honor the past. Inside Westminster Abbey, 2,000 guests stood beneath the vaulted ceilings as the world watched through their screens, more than 36 million viewers in total. Kate's gown, designed by Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen, struck a perfect chord between royal tradition and contemporary grace. From the moment she stepped out of the car, the collective mood shifted. Even the Queen, often restrained in public emotion, couldn't hide her joy. According to biographer Andrew Morton, she leaned toward Prince Philip as the crowd erupted and whispered with quiet delight. That was excellent. But as the newlyweds emerged from the Abbey and approached the gilded 1902 state landau, that joy was ever so slightly clouded by a fleeting murmur, one only a trained lip-reader later captured. The Queen, standing just a step away from the cheering masses, turned to Prince Philip once more and softly said, "I wanted them to take the smaller carriage." It wasn't a matter of aesthetics or logistics. The Queen had hoped they'd use the glass coach, an enclosed, humbler carriage with a history woven deeply into her heart. She had ridden in it on her own wedding day in 1947. It carried Princess Anne in 1973 and Diana in 1981. That coach wasn't merely a vehicle, it was an emotional artifact, a moving tribute to the endurance of the crown. But clear skies meant no rain. Cover was needed, and the team opted for the grandeur of the open landau. It was a spectacular choice by every measure, except perhaps the one that mattered most to her. She said nothing more. She waved. She smiled. But for those who knew her best, that quiet remark echoed the Queen's deepest instinct, that even in moments of public joy, private meaning could be found in the smallest of details. Unlike the picture-perfect union of William and Kate, what unfolded at Harry and Meghan's wedding quietly unsettled the Queen. But why? Stay glued to your screen. A royal day that shook the crown. Still basking in the public glow of William and Kate's flawless union, the Queen approached Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding with hope. But what unfolded that day in May 2018 quietly unsettled her, and for reasons steeped in symbolism, propriety, and a growing weariness with drama. Royal weddings were more than personal milestones to Queen Elizabeth II. They were sacred rituals tied to centuries of tradition, where every detail carried deep meaning. But Meghan, with her Hollywood past and independent flair, didn't just challenge those customs. She tore right through them. To begin with, Meghan's gown raised more than eyebrows. She wore a bright white Givenchy dress with a sweeping 16-foot veil, an ensemble traditionally reserved for brides entering their first marriage. Meghan, divorced, and previously married to producer Trevor Engelson, appeared dressed as though walking into a fairy tale for the very first time. According to royal biographer Tom Bower, the Queen quietly questioned the choice, reportedly asking in hushed tones, "Why does she need a veil?" The monarch's cousin, Lady Elizabeth Anson, later disclosed that Her Majesty thought the dress looked too white, a subtle but loaded critique. It was impossible not to compare it to Camilla's wedding attire, a toned-down cream outfit, no veil, and a quiet nod to her second-time bride status. Meghan, in contrast, wanted grand, and she got it. Her veil, though undeniably stunning with its floral embroidery representing all 53 Commonwealth nations, wasn't enough to distract from what was happening behind the scenes. Meghan had clashed with Angela Kelly, the Queen's trusted dresser and gatekeeper of royal jewelry, over access to the tiara. Meghan was reportedly displeased with the rules surrounding its fitting and the speed of the process, while the Queen, always protective of her staff, took it as a sign of disrespect. It was the kind of tension Elizabeth had endured before, but it was getting harder to keep brushing it off. As if the tension around the dress and tiara weren't enough, Meghan's father, Thomas Markle, famously did not attend the wedding. The Queen had encouraged her to make peace, to mend things before the big day, but it didn't happen. Instead, Prince Charles stepped in to walk Meghan down the aisle, a kind gesture, but not the one the Queen had envisioned. Royal author Katie Nicholl later wrote that the Queen believed the entire situation could have been managed with more care. Adding to the discomfort, Harry, who served in the military, wanted to keep his beard while donning full ceremonial uniform, another break with custom. Traditionally, beards were not permitted with military dress. Yet Harry insisted, and despite the Queen's hesitations, she allowed it. It was a small gesture, but one that felt like yet another compromise. Throughout the ceremony, Her Majesty remained poised, but sharp-eyed observers noted her unusually solemn expression. It wasn't until later that those close to her revealed what she truly felt. She had tried again and again to accommodate, but the constant waves of friction had worn her down. In private, she was said to have sighed, "I don't know, I don't care, and I don't want to think about it anymore." She had loved Harry deeply, but even her patience had its limits. A name too sacred. And just when it seemed the royal drama might quiet down, another deeply personal wound reopened old tensions behind palace walls. Queen Elizabeth had lived through decades of royal turbulence, abdications, divorces, even a fire at Windsor Castle, always with poise and silence. But in 2021, something pierced deeper than scandal. Harry and Meghan named their daughter Lilibet. To the outside world, it might have seemed like a tribute, but within the palace, it stirred heartbreak. Lilibet wasn't just a name. It was the Queen's childhood nickname, whispered only by her parents, Sister Margaret and Prince Philip. It belonged to her private world, not the public eye. Harry and Meghan insisted the Queen had given her blessing, yet royal insiders told another story. She hadn't been asked, she'd been told. And for a monarch who had weathered a century of change with dignity, being blindsided by her own grandson was more than a misstep. It felt like a betrayal. According to royal expert Phil Dampier, the Queen was quietly but unmistakably hurt. What made it worse was the growing suspicion that every intimate moment could be turned into Netflix content or podcast material. The trust, already fragile after the Oprah interview and public accusations of racism, was now shattered. When the couple brought baby Lilibet to meet the Queen in private, palace staff feared it was less a family visit and more a media setup. So the Queen made an uncharacteristically firm choice. No official photo, no staged moment, no chance of exploitation. Her decision was final. To the world, Queen Elizabeth remained serene. But behind the scenes, this quiet act of defiance revealed just how deeply she'd been wounded by those she once held closest. But what do you think? Was naming their daughter Lilibet a heartfelt tribute or a calculated move that crossed a sacred line? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe.